Quite a lot of people nowadays claim that doing cold exposure makes our bodies produce vitamin D, and therefore we should all be doing cold exposure in the winter to get vitamin D when we cannot get it from the sun. And it's not true. Dare I say it. We don't produce vitamin D from doing cold exposure. Now, what is the reasoning behind the theory that we produce vitamin D from doing cold exposure? It's actually based on a scientific study. Indeed, there is a scientific study, quite a new one, modern one, when they took several women with multiple sclerosis and several women who were healthy, and they made them do 20 sessions of cryotherapy, which was like it. I don't know what exactly it is. It's like vacuum, and there was like negative 120 degrees Celsius, which is quite cold. And actually, what they found is that after 20 sessions of minus 120 degrees, women participating in that study actually did have higher vitamin D levels. However, there is a big nuance, there is a caveat in that study. Women with multiple sclerosis, which means not healthy women, they experienced a significant rise of vitamin D levels in their blood after doing the 20 sessions of cryotherapy. They experienced like a rise of like 10 milligrams per deciliter of vitamin D. And you should, according to quantum biologists, which are big into vitamin D, we should have around 60 milligrams per deciliter of vitamin D. And women with multiple sclerosis, after 20 sessions of cryotherapy, it raised by 10 milligrams per deciliter. That's a lot. That's a big lot. Like, that's a sixth of your vitamin D level. That's a huge amount of vitamin D. Therefore, yeah, if you have multiple sclerosis, it's a smart idea to do cold exposure and cryotherapy because the amount of vitamin D which they got from it was very significant. However, the caveat comes with the healthy woman, because the healthy woman who did the same amount of cold exposure, the same amount of cryotherapy, 20 sessions of minus 120 degrees, which is a lot. If these women were healthy and didn't have multiple sclerosis, they also experienced a rise in their vitamin D levels. But how much was it? 2 milligrams per deciliter. You are supposed to have 60 milligrams per deciliter of vitamin D in your blood. But if you are healthy, then you get a raise of 2 milligrams per deciliter, which is a completely insignificant amount, especially if you need to expose yourself to minus 120 degrees 20 times to get 2 milligrams. That's very little. But why is it that people with multiple sclerosis had like 5 times that? They had 10 milligrams rather than 2 milligrams. Where? Well, there are two options. Like, I'm not a scientist. I'm not saying it is this way or this way, but objectively it's true that there are like two options. Like, one option is that healthy people just suck at producing vitamin D from cold exposure. We are just not good enough to produce a lot of vitamin D from cold exposure. But people with multiple sclerosis, sick people whose bodies work worse than our bodies, these people have this superpower that they can produce 5 times as much vitamin D from cold exposure. Like, if you have a character development screen before you're born and you can pick, okay, I will get multiple sclerosis. It will make me sicker, it will make my body function worse, it will make my life worse overall. But there is one pro. When you get multiple sclerosis, you become like 5 times better at producing vitamin D from cold exposure. And you can now ponder, should I actually get multiple sclerosis? Because then I will be way better and I will be superior to healthy people at producing vitamin D from cold exposure. No, that's complete bullshit. Maybe it is the case. Maybe people with multiple sclerosis can just produce way more vitamin D from cold exposure than healthy people. So if you want to live in a cold climate, then you should consider getting multiple sclerosis so you can produce more vitamin D from cold exposure. But what I find is more likely is that you don't actually produce vitamin D from doing cold exposure, you only release it. Because You're getting vitamin D all spring, all summer, and then during the autumn. And it doesn't just go away into nowhere. It gets stored somewhere in your body. And when you do cold exposure, it's very possible that the stored vitamin D. Actually, it's not possible. It is the case, and I will look at it with more studies later. But you have stored vitamin D inside of you. When you do cold exposure, which is it's a big thing. It does a lot of things in your body and makes you burn fat. It makes you produce hormones. It does a lot of stuff. It's absolutely not unreasonable to believe that it makes you like release stored vitamin D. And if you have multiple sclerosis, then for any reason you have more vitamin D stored than circulating. And then when you do cold exposure, you release more of the stored vitamin D. I don't know why. Maybe people with multiple sclerosis are worse at keeping vitamin D circulating, and therefore they need to store it more or whatever. Or they are sick and they need the vitamin D to be stored in some tissues in order to repair something. And then by doing cold exposure, maybe you stop that process and it makes the stored vitamin D go haywire and go into your bloodstream. So it's what can I say more about this? Hold on. Yeah, I think I said everything. Now, how can I be so certain that you don't produce vitamin D from cold exposure, but you only release it? Well, even if you do produce vitamin D from cold exposure, again, 20 sessions of minus 120 degrees for 2 milligrams per deciliter if you don't have multiple sclerosis. In other words, if you literally freeze to death, then you will still have less vitamin D produced from cold exposure than if you go outside in the spring for 15 minutes shirtless. Therefore, the amount of cold exposure you need to do and the vitamin D you produce from it is insignificant, honestly. And actually, I asked some quantum biologist about this. His name starts with E and ends with excellent health. And he told me, oh yeah, that's probably because vitamin D from cold exposure is harder to measure. Look at my unicorn. He's invisible, so he's very hard to measure, but he is here. And then he said that you need to do way more cold exposure, like doing 20 sessions of minus 120 degrees is not cold. It's not cold enough. If you have multiple sclerosis and you have the super genes for producing more vitamin D, then yeah, if you have multiple sclerosis, if you are that blessed to have multiple sclerosis and be that much better than us, then yeah, it's enough. But otherwise, minus 120 degrees is not enough. You need to do an ice bath and cold shower every day, both of these, once a day. And then you need to walk outside shirtless for an hour every day to get enough. If you freeze to death, then you will. If you fucking freeze to death, then maybe you will get enough vitamin D from cold exposure to have it compare to few minutes in spring sunlight. My fucking god. Yeah. But how can I be so certain that it makes you release vitamin D and not produce it? Well, did you know that there are scientific studies? I will link them in the description if I don't forget. Otherwise, I don't know, you can text me or you can find them, you can look them up. There are studies showing that if you work out and exercise, then your vitamin D levels drop less during winter. And that's both if you lose weight and if you don't lose weight during that exercise. Because, as I told you, you sun yourself your entire summer. Does the vitamin D just go away? No, it gets stored in your tissues and in your blood. Not in your blood, in your fat. If you work out and you burn fat, then that vitamin D in your fat tissue is released. If you work out and you don't burn fat, then still, if you work out hard enough or you are in ketosis or whatever, then you have triglycerides stored in your tissues and fats. And if you work outside, exercise in any way, or even do cold exposure, which burns fat as well, then you will access the stored vitamin D in your tissues and it goes out. I actually talked with Excellent Health privately about the studies with exercising, and he told me, yeah, cold exposure does the same. It makes you release stored vitamin D because cold exposure burns fat, like physical activity, like exercise. It's just a similar. And I told him like, yeah, but cold exposure is supposed to create vitamin D, and he's like, yeah, it does. But at the same time, it makes you release the stored vitamin D in your tissues because it burns fat like physical activity and exercise. So if you can admit that, if we can admit or see that, yeah, cold exposure makes you release vitamin D, and there is any rise of vitamin D from doing cold exposure, even though it's fucking insignificant, then we can admit that cold exposure vitamin D rise is from releasing stored vitamin D in your fats. How can we tell that it's being produced and not just released? If it's being produced, then it's being released at the same time, and we don't know how much is being released and how much is being produced. It's just, sorry, it's being released, and cold exposure is actually not that effective at releasing it unless you have multiple sclerosis, as you've seen in that study, because there's even a study about, okay, the studies about exercise, keeping your vitamin D levels higher in the winter. That's fine. That was like people who didn't exercise had like 15% less vitamin D than people who did exercise, because like if you don't exercise, if you don't use the fat in your tissues, then the vitamin D levels will drop more than if you exercise. And I actually didn't see the details, like how much did they exercise, for how long, and whatever. So I'm not going to use these numbers, like, oh yeah, if you exercise, then you have more vitamin D than from doing cold exposure. Because I don't know, because if they exercise for like 3 months, then that's more than doing 20 sessions of cold cryotherapy. So I want to compare it with a different study, upon which I will base my claim that exercising is more effective than cold exposure for releasing stored vitamin D. And there is a study called something like single bout of exercise makes you increase your vitamin D levels. And it's a study about not especially winter, but it's basically when you do single bout of exercise, like you do one single workout, and then they looked at the blood of people who did one single bout of exercise. And I don't know if it was bodybuilding, running, or whatever, but basically exercise, something where you get warm, not cold. After one bout of that exercise, the vitamin D levels raised, and actually it wasn't measured in units, like milligrams per deciliter, but let's assume that that people in this study had 60 milligrams per deciliter as their baseline. On average, the baseline of vitamin D levels after single bout of exercise raised by 15%. It wasn't claimed in units, but in the percentage, 15%. If you have 60 milligrams per deciliter and you do single bout of exercise, then your vitamin D levels after that one bout of exercise, was it 15% actually? Yes, I believe it was. Or maybe it was less? Hold on, I gotta see my notes. Yes, I'm wrong. Sorry, I'm completely wrong. But the vitamin D levels in these people who did single bout of exercise, they raised by 4%, which if you have 60 milligrams per deciliter, that's 2.4 milligrams per deciliter more of vitamin D. Now, that's very similar amount of vitamin D which the healthy woman got from doing 20 bouts of cold exposure. But you do 20 bouts of minus 120 degrees, and it raises your vitamin D the same amount as doing a single bout of exercise. Therefore, I believe that exercise is just as, if not way more effective than doing cold exposure. And it's possible that after doing a cold exposure session, I'm going to be honest, after they did one cold exposure session, it's possible that their vitamin D levels increased by 2 milligrams. And then they dropped again, and then they increased again after another session, and like that. Maybe. Or maybe they didn't, and they only got into 2 milligrams per deciliter more after 20 sessions. Whatever. In both cases, doing exercise makes you release just as much, if not more, vitamin D than doing the cold exposure. Therefore, you don't need cold exposure to create more vitamin D than you would get anyway from doing exercise. There are benefits to doing cold exposure, and I will be talking about them in my next hour-long cold exposure video, which I plan to do right after this one. And it's actually going to be a video against cold exposure. But at the end, I will tell you, yeah, cold exposure actually does have benefits. You can do it. But it doesn't make you produce vitamin D. It makes you release stored vitamin D, and exercise does as well. So doing cold baths all winter will, okay, it will give you some vitamin D, but instead of freezing yourself to death, you can just go on a hike. Now, besides doing exercise, and maybe if you're radical, doing cold exposure to release stored vitamin D, what else can you do to get vitamin D in the winter? Well, supplements are poison. Usually it's the case that the supplements you get are not even the thing you are supplementing. You are not supplementing vitamin D. You are supplementing some lab-made nonsense which has similar molecular structure to vitamin D, which makes them able to market it as vitamin D. And they get it from artificial sources, from fucking seed oils, or if they get it from natural sources, then they need to let's say you have some animal tissue, like butter, and you have some vitamin D in it. In order to separate the vitamin D from all of the fats, the nutrients, the vitamins, and everything in the butter, then you need to use solvents and chemicals to separate these two. And at the end, the vitamin D or any other thing you want to process from that natural food is completely destroyed with chemicals, and full of chemicals as well. Or it's not even made in this process, but made in a lab, and it's not even the thing you are trying to supplement. And it's just looks similar enough under a microscope, which allows it to do it. And if you do it, then maybe you will experience some beneficial effects. I've heard people who take supplements, I feel way better when I do it. It's because it's poisonous, and when you take that supplement, it low-key poisons you, like let's say coffee, and you get small adrenaline rush from being poisoned, which then gives you energy and makes you feel good, kind of like a cold shower. It's not healthy. Don't supplement vitamin D. It's bullshit. Now, how do you get vitamin D in winter? Again, I want to stress it. Not by doing cold exposure. One way is when it's sunny. It's funny because now I'm going to tell you to do cold exposure in a way. But when it's sunny, you take your coat and your sweater like this, so you don't get too cold. But you take off your shirt, or you put it over your neck, so all of your body is warm and you feel pleasant. However, your entire abdomen is exposed to sunlight as well as your face. You can do this, and if you walk uphill or you do some physical labor or exercise, whatever, and you get pretty warm, then you can just expose your abdomen to the sunlight. And you are getting sunlight on the most important part of your body. It has a lot of volume, the skin. You will get quite a lot of sunlight when it's sunny. Then you can also go shirtless in winter, not for hours to get cold, but if it's sunny, then yeah, you can go shirtless and get some sunlight. You could get some cold. You could do some cold exposure and get cold adapted to the point of not feeling very unpleasant while doing cold exposure, while being outside in the cold. But just don't overdo it. Do it enough that you can sunbathe yourself in the winter. Also, UV light is being reflected by sunlight, so it's not enough to get you tan. And okay, I don't think that Eskimos are tan because UV light reflects sunlight and makes it that strong. But if you stand somewhere with quite a lot of sunlight and a lot of snow and you take your shirt off, then you're getting some sunlight and you're getting some vitamin D. Then the most important thing is to sun max during the summer. go into the sunlight as often as you can during the summer, spring, and autumn. Like, do as much sunlight as you can outside winter, because that will make you get a lot of vitamin D, and you will store a lot of vitamin D. If you are outside shirtless in the summer all day long, then you are going to have excess of vitamin D, which is going to be stored. And then during the winter, when you work, exercise, or do cold exposure or anything, you will have more stored vitamin D, which your body can release. Now, it is possible that your body actually releases vitamin D regardless of exercise. Maybe if you are on raw primal and you do a lot of sun maxing in the summer, then maybe you don't even need to exercise, and your body will intelligently like release the vitamin D from your tissues. But I don't really care. I have hard physical labor on a farm. It's basically like working out. So yeah, if you move, then your stored vitamin D will be released into your bloodstream. And the more sun you had in summer, the more stored vitamin D there is for your body to use. Then, of course, eating animal fat, especially raw. If you cook meat, or everyone watching my channel eats raw meat, but let's say there is one guy who found me, like, who doesn't. If you cook anything, then you destroy stuff in it. And if you cook meat, and well, especially vitamin D, vitamin D is not even like a vitamin; it's like an animal hormone. And if you cook something, then it's very easy to think that that animal hormone, vitamin D, will be completely destroyed. If you eat food raw, if you eat animal fat raw, raw butter, raw pig fat, raw, how do you call it, suet, the beef fat, raw anything, which raw milk, then you will get vitamin D from that animal food. It's not a lot. I wouldn't say that eating animal foods is enough for us to get vitamin D, especially in the summer. Like, if you tell me I don't need to go outside into the sun because I eat meat from cows which are outside in the sun and I get all my vitamin D from the meat, fuck you. You know, I don't like Jack Kruse and quantum biologists, but you fucking need the sunlight, and you need as much of it as you can get. But yeah, in the winter, it's actually, I would say it's significant. Like, eating raw animal foods with a lot of fats, that's significant, I would say. The difference in vitamin D you are getting, because if you are getting vitamin D, I mean, if you're eating animals which were living outside, and now it's winter. Let's say you slaughtered it in the winter, so it's not sunny when lately. But still, like you store vitamin D in your tissues, these animals were outside all summer, all their life, and they have bunch of vitamin D stored in their tissues. If you kill them in the winter, then you eat all of these tissues which have stored vitamin D in them. And I believe that's a significant amount of vitamin D which you can get. Another thing which you can do is, I told you about this. Yeah, if you eat quite a lot of animal fat during winter, then during all of the year, if you eat a lot of animal fat and a lot of cholesterol, then all of your hormones are created from cholesterol. And vitamin D is a hormone. You need cholesterol to create vitamin D. And your body creates cholesterol. But if you eat more cholesterol, it's going to be given an excess of cholesterol, which it can use to produce hormones like testosterone or vitamin D. If you eat more cholesterol and animal fats, and raw animal fats basically, because then the cholesterol isn't oxidized and it's better to use. If you eat cholesterol during summer, when you are getting a lot of sunlight, then you will have more, you will be able to produce more vitamin D, and you will have more fat to store vitamin D. Therefore, in the winter, you will release more vitamin D. And then again, if you eat a lot more animal fat in the winter, then first you will get warmer, because animal fat, it makes your body able to warm itself up. But second, if you get, let's say, some sunlight in UV index 1 on your stomach, like I told you, in the winter, when it's small amount of sunlight, if you are full of cholesterol and animal fats, then you will have easier time catching some of that sunlight and creating some vitamin D from it than if you are, let's say, on a low-fat diet. Is that everything? Yes. So now I'm going to show you that I'm a scammer, and that all of this wasn't for education, but to make me money. You see, I have this paid community on school, which is like $2. It's $2 a month. Maybe it's going to be $3 soon. It's the second link in the description. You should check it out. There is like 30 people who eat raw meat. It's a community, and we want to host real life meetups. And it costs $2 per month per now. But honestly, I'm going to probably increase the price to $3. And actually, if you check out that second link in the description, and it's going to cost $3 instead of $2, then I wouldn't buy it. If it's $3, then it's not worth it anymore. But if it's $2, it's okay. You can buy it. Eat raw meat, wear blue blockers, and grow your hair out.